In this video, we're going to be covering how to set up finance sources for F&I in the Lizzy system. The first thing that you need to understand is the drop list that's on a major unit deal that asks you what bank you're going to be financing the deal through. It originates from the contact section. So it is very important that we set up the different finance sources properly before we get to actually doing a deal. And if you end up adding a new finance source, you need to follow these processes for it. So what we're going to do is we've located a contact record, and this happens to be a bank. And I'm going to edit the contact type list that's right here on the right. And when we edit that, there's two things you have to set and one thing that is an option. The first thing is we have to set this up as a finance. So this is a contact type of finance. And also we need to have it set as a supplier. The primary reason for this is that when you set up a finance supplier, it gives you defaults for the bank information. When you set up the supplier, that's where you put in your account number and things like that with the bank. So it needs both of those for printing out the different forms and stuff that we print. So these two things have to be set, and we're going to cover the details of those in just a second. Now, the F&I finance source is really completely non-functional. What it does is it basically limits the list of banks that show up in that drop list to only the ones that have also been set with this option. So there's no settings or anything involved with it. There is a default over in the invoicing settings that I'm going to show you in a moment, but the financing source is only here to further limit the list. If you do not check this, then by default it's going to be showing you all the finance suppliers. So as an example, if you have 20 finance suppliers listed but you only want 5 of them to show up on the deal, then you can add this option to each one of them and then change the setting in settings that I'll show you in a moment to actually have it only show those 5 or 10 that you want to show. So this is something that is not mandatory, but you can use it if you want. But finance and supplier you have to set. Once you set those, you're going to hit the save button and you'll be returned to the contact record. Now, once you set those and you turn them on, you'll notice that these two items actually have turned blue, which means that there's things in there that I might want to pay attention to, or I want to review at least. We'll start with supplier because it's one of the simpler one. And in fact, I want to point out something. You'll notice the information that's showing up here for the supplier, and this is the main supplier info, but it also shows up for the finance. So really, technically, you don't need to click on both of them. You really only need to click on the finance one. It's just that we have to have them both set because there's some things that are only available in the supplier section. So as an example, the account number that we have with the bank, there's things on here that you may want to set for some of that stuff. We're not buying inventory or anything like that, so none of the stuff up here needs to be set. It's really just about putting in our account number so that it can get printed on the forms. Now, when we get down to the very bottom of this control, and again, finance and supplier, they both are going to show the same control, so it doesn't technically matter which one you pick. But down at the very bottom, we have buy here, pay here information, and other defaults that you can set for this particular bank. And what this means is that when I choose that bank, let's, for example, say that I set an annual percentage rate. When I choose that bank, it'll automatically put 7% on there. If that's the average, that's the normal thing that ends up getting financed. I can have certain defaults like that get set on that deal automatically for me, and that's primarily what this is for. Now, the days to first payment, typically it's going to be 30 days. You can set that so that it automatically sets it on the deal for you when you choose this bank. But again, it's not mandatory because you can always set it over on the deal. There's a couple things here, however, that you cannot set on the deal that you need to make sure you have selected properly, and that is the charge interest on the extra days. if the bank has a 30-day grace period on their payments, but they charge interest on days that go over that. So let's say that they have agreed that the payment is not going to be due for 45 days. So technically the customer does not have to pay the bill for 45 days, but the difference between that 30 and that 45 days, those 15 days are going to have interest applied to the balance. So that is going to change the monthly payment amount because there's 15, whatever days that have some extra interest that has been applied to the deal. So you need to make sure that you have that checkbox checked appropriately for each of your finance sources. The second thing is your prepaid finance charge. Some banks charge a prepaid finance charge, and if they do, you need to make sure that you have that amount filled into this field in the contact record. This is the only place that you can set this, and if you don't set it, your finance payment amount are going to be wrong because it's not going to be applying this prepaid finance charge. So you need to make sure you have those two things filled out all the time. The rest of the stuff is completely up to you. Finally, down here at the bottom, we have a receivable account. By default, Lizzy knows it has a default receivable account that it's going to be using for everything, but you do have the ability to create your own account and link this particular supplier to its own receivable account if you want to. So it's just kind of an override to the default if you want to set it. Now, I mentioned earlier on the F&I finance source that there was a way to limit the finance vendors that are showing up on the deal to only being those. Again, this does not get you out of having to set finance and supplier on everything, but it is an additional contact type that we can add. Now, if we go over here to settings and we go to invoicing defaults and we scroll down here to the unit sales section, you'll see a checkbox here that says show only those contacts indicated as F&I finance source. So this basically, if you check this, is going to limit the people or the banks that show up on your deals to only being the ones that have also had this option selected in their contact type. So just because you have somebody set up as a finance supplier does not mean they're going to automatically show up on the deal unless they also have this F&I finance source included as well.